Sustainable Procurement Day. 24 hours of non-stop content, knowledge and tools on how to embed sustainability more easily into procurement. This has been created for procurement by procurement, and we really hope you enjoy it. Today would not be possible without the SPP champions, organisations that have committed to embedding sustainability into procurement functions, and procurement leaders, in fact, that are empowering and equipping them to do so. A huge and special thanks to Accenture, Bayer, BAT, CBRE, Colgate-Palmolive, Eaton, GSK, Klockner Pentaplast, Lego, Merck, Schneider Electric, Solvay, Tetra Pak, Thermo Fisher and Walgreens Boots Alliance. But a big thanks also to the 5 new SPP champions that are joining us in time for World Sustainable Procurement Day. Allianz, AstraZeneca, Avantor, Vodafone and NSG Group. If you're interested in finding out more about becoming an SPP champion and embedding sustainability into your procurement organisation, then get in touch with us. We'd love to have you, and a huge thanks to all of those that have donated and supported us already. Let's drive change together.
Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us. Good morning, still good afternoon and good evening. My name is Sonia Coupry. I'm a steering member of the SPP and I'm also in charge of the Sustainable Procurement Program at FedEx. I would like to give a very warm welcome to our amazing panel. I am so pleased to have you and honored to have you around here. We have Esther Diskamp, CPO of Maersk. We have Daniel Bartel, CPO at Schneider Electric. We have Francesco Bassoli, Vice President Global Procurement at Amcor. And last but not least, Malcolm Harrison, Group CEO at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply Chain, also more known as CIPS. Couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going. We have a net etiquette that will be posted in the chat, so have a look if you have any doubts. The session will be recorded and it will be made available later on our SPP platform. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat box, in the Q&A box. Somebody will be monitoring it. Now let's get started. So as I said, we have an amazing panel. Everybody, I think, is very much looking forward to hear your views as CPO of these leading world organizations. In this session, we will focus on how to implement sustainable procurement practices in those large organizations with a global footprint and the challenges and also opportunities maybe that go with it. The idea is also to make this session practical, so hopefully, it will inspire some of you, and hopefully you go away also with some practical tools and ideas on what you can do to bring that into your organization. Some context around this session. I think we are all aware of the current conditions. I don't dare using the word climate because it has also another context. We're still suffering in supply chain around the world on the ongoing repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic and the disruptions it created. We have geopolitical tensions very close to us in Europe with the war in Ukraine, but also other places in the world, obviously. The impact this has generated on energy prices. We have inflation. The EBRD announced, I think, a couple of days ago that the inflation is actually often triggered also by margin increases rather than energy prices increases, so something also to reflect on. Yet, at the same time, sustainability is becoming increasingly important. The GIEC report was published yesterday. It confirms, as we pretty much all knew already, but it confirms that we won't keep it under 1.5 degrees by 2030. So the planet requires us to act. Customers of these large organizations want those companies to act as well. And investors, some financial institutions are requiring companies also to act on sustainability. And last but not least, the legislators. In Europe, we have the Green Deal. We have a number of legislation on the national level, but also upcoming European directives that will really force companies to act on sustainability. We have the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive that is coming up. We have a directive coming up on due diligence. We must act, companies must act. So I think there's a very obvious question that comes up immediately. How procurement, I used to know this, a CPO was saying the number one bullet point on any procurement organization is savings. How do you, I see Malcolm, you're smiling. We still need, procurement still needs to bring savings. There's a pressure on costs everywhere, yet we need to bring sustainability. So I would love to hear from you, CPOs of leading organizations. How do you push the sustainability agenda in your organizations in this context? Anyone wants to take the floor first?
Sonia, I guess having started off smiling, I really ought to sort of grab the headlines on this one. So it's interesting you say procurement's always been about savings. I disagree. Procurement has always been about delivering value, and sometimes value is delivered through delivering savings. But it's always been about value. And I actually think that what's happened in the last few years is that organizations have realized that things like resilience, things like ensuring that your supply chains are sustainable, things like ensuring that you've got really, really good focus on integrity, eliminating modern day slavery. All of those issues are what sort of has come to the fore. And yes, you've got to do that and deliver value. You always have. But I think for me, this has become a really, really complex and frankly very exciting world for the procurement and supply profession. I mean, the choices that businesses make today through their supply chains really impact the entirety of what you do, because it's about water security, it's about carbon emissions, it's about waste management, it's about deforestation. And as you so rightly said, when you've got regulators and investors taking a real interest in this as well, that just pushes the function and the priority right to the top of the agenda. And I think it's incredibly important that sustainability is led by the business. It's led by the CEO, and it requires input from across the business. And perhaps procurement and supply, you could say, is perhaps the most crucial ingredient, particularly when you look at things like Scope 3 emissions and the fact that Scope 3 emissions are in supply chains. But for me, the role of the profession has changed fundamentally to focus on resilience, to focus on sustainability, to focus and to continue to focus on value. It's just such a great time for the profession.
Absolutely. Any thoughts from Esther, Danielle, or Francesco on?
Yeah, from my side, Sonia, I couldn't agree more, Malcolm, with what you're saying. Right. I think if you rewind 30 years. Sure, procurement was seen as a source of value, but the value was only defined as cost reduction or savings actions, right? And that's steadily evolved over the years, right? We're very much, doing co-innovation with suppliers to create new technologies and enable growth, for example, right? We are charged with building resilience now into the supply base, which usually has a cost as well, right? It's usually more counter to driving cost savings, right? But we do what the business needs. And when it comes to sustainability, I think what I see is the companies that value sustainability, those are the ones that are asking their procurement departments to get to work, right, on the environmental and social and governance topics with their suppliers. So it's definitely an evolution, but savings will always be there, and there will always be, I think, some kind of a tension between the two. But, I see two sides of it. On one side, sustainability pays, right? When you start reducing your carbon, you start reducing your energy consumption, you save money. On the other side, I see sustainability versus cost as just another, dilemma that managers need to manage, right? Just like, inventory versus service or lead time, right? Or, investing for the long term versus reaping profits in the short term. It's just another dilemma we have to find our way through to manage. And if we just had to optimize one thing, our jobs would be too easy. They wouldn't need smart people like all of you on the panel today and those connected to manage those conflicts. So it's not easy, but we can find our way through if we value as a company, right, and as an industry, the topic of sustainability.
And if I may add to what Daniel and Malcolm are saying, for me, the role of procurement is risk management, whether it's supply risk or cost risk, but also brand risk. And our customers are asking us very actively, what is it that you do? And Maersk is very outspoken in the decarb area with our vessels and developing new fuel solutions, but also the social part. So for me, the cost element, it's a little bit, if you compare what you had in the past and you just look at pricing, your price is gonna go up, but you're comparing apples with oranges, because the base of what your base requirement does need to include sustainability aspects. And I think we are past the time that it was like an optional thing that we could look at. If I listen, and when our customers are very vocal on that, our biggest customers, this is their requirement, and we must meet that requirement to stay relevant and competitive. So it's from a cost perspective, it doesn't also necessarily have to be more expensive, but you have to make sure that you are make your right choices from both an environmental as well as a social and governmental aspects. So I normally always agree with you, Sonia, but this time I disagree.
But yeah, we're all talking about similar things. We're talking about, but we're talking about business issues. We're talking about things which are fundamental to a business. So we're talking about investors. We're talking about customers. We're talking about employees. And when customers are making a choice as to which supplier they use, or investors are making a choice as to who do they invest in, or employees are thinking about who it is they want to work for. And in part, that's all about the reputation of that organization, which is going to be driven by how much that organization is focusing on sustainability and sustainable supply chains. I mean, these are massive business issues. And that's why I go back to what I'm saying. I think this has created and is creating a new and much more important role for the profession.
Yes, definitely. And I think it would be interesting to come back later to elaborate a little bit also on how you have seen these changes of the role of procurement and what skills and capabilities procurement professionals have need to develop, and also how you need to organize yourself differently. I'd like to come back to that, but there's two things that were said in the conversation so far. Unless, Francesco, you would like to comment on this first topic first, and then I'll bounce further.
Listen, just a few words. I think I agree with all that has been said so far. All of us have a very important role to play here. I think we have been listening to many webinars or conversation where a CEO or a CPO like us have been saying that sustainability doesn't have to come at a cost. At the same time, I think we all recognize that we are now moving to a place where supply chains and cost structure need to be optimized after being optimized for 40 years. So definitely this is a process that needs to build. I think our role is also to ensuring that inside each of our company, this agenda is very clear and very visible. What we do normally in procurement, I always say, is we are a couple of years ahead of what things will be in future. So we take positions and ensuring that companies understand our issues in positioning in the right place, what we source, what technology, what material we source. It's becoming very critical. I mean, examples is anything that that any company pledges for 2025 is something that this group here probably has been already sourcing right now. So making sure that in the boardroom we position, we share the information about our market constraints is very critical. I think we have a very important role. I look at procurement as managing that interface between each company and the supply market. And I think we have that visibility that no one else has. So certainly I see our role to be so critical for the companies to position exactly where we want to be for the future.
No, exactly. Francesco, would you even say that maybe procurement, because you were saying earlier that procurement is often ahead in an organization of what happens in the rest of the organization, and I've witnessed it myself in previous organizations I've worked for before. But would you say that procurement also could be the one pushing the sustainability agenda and not necessarily wait for it to come from the top?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly where we stand, and I think we have a very important responsibility to play in each of our companies. Let me make some practical example, and I maybe start from myself, from our company.
Oh, I think we've lost Francesco.
Well, hey, Sonia, just to jump in whilst Francesco is coming back on again. I think I've always said that really world-class procurement is about operating with the business for the business. In other words, it's closely collaborating with the various parts of the organization, but for the benefit of the organization. And sustainability completely falls into that category.
Thanks, Marco. Francesco, I think you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the connection. Yes, I was saying that in my mind, we certainly have that role to bring in issues in advance of probably the rest of the organization, really because we manage that interface with the supply market. So we bring intelligence from our suppliers, understanding what is going to happen to them. One example, just to visualize what I'm trying to say here is, one example, for instance, for Amcor, which is a packaging company. So we try to use more recycled, more circular plastics in the product that we sell. So we're trying to buy material in a market that doesn't exist anymore. So one of my role is also ensuring that in the boardroom, we understand that we are committing, trying to develop market for ensuring that we have position that will be fundamental for us in future. So it's not a traditional sourcing role, but it's a developmental role. It's a role which you have to play along the value chain with your customer that will need the product and with your supplier that need to develop the product. So we need to position procurement in that strategic manner, and then in that sort of taking position view for ensuring that sustainability will play the role that each company strategy needs for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Francesco. Well, this is a great segue to the question I was going to ask next, and it's actually you've partially answered it already. So, what does it mean for your procurement organizations? How do they need to change in terms of skills that are available, or how you organize yourself, how you work? Esther or Daniel, maybe would you like to elaborate on that?
I'll start here. It depends a little bit on what it is that you're sourcing. Tapping into what Francesco just said, a lot of our effort is going into source something that is not there yet. If you look in the shipping industry, that's still very fossil fuel driven. Maersk and also the competitors have bought biofuel vessels, but those need fuel, and that is not available in the quantities that you need. So from a procurement perspective, that requires something completely different, building with suppliers and governments and what have you, to make sure that you have what you need, your supply risk going forward. That is one aspect. And the other aspect is to make sure that we have, as an organization, also, do we have the right tools? Do we ask the right questions? Because our responsibility, for instance, in the social aspect, is no longer like an optional one. Legislation is coming our way. And I was talking with a colleague earlier today, and legislation is always, it's a hard driver, but you need to be ahead of legislation in order to be compliant going forward. So I think the adaptability and agility of organizations and the people in the organizations is key, whether you are buying traditional goods or services or developing into new areas.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Esther. Yeah, fully agree. Daniel, anything you would like to add?
I mean, I can completely relate to what Francesco and Esther are saying about taking the lead, right? And and developing supply markets that don't exist. Another example, we have a target in Schneider to increase the content of green materials in our products, and green means recycled. It could mean biomaterials, et cetera, right? So, for example, getting away from virgin plastics and going to something that's more green. Those markets where they do exist, they're really small scale and therefore really expensive. Getting back to your question earlier about cost versus sustainability, to go green on plastics today and highly engineered materials, you would need to increase your cost dramatically until there's enough of a demand, right? So the producers scale up. So that requires us to collaborate, right? To work together with companies in our own industry, so our own competitors, right? As well as other industries to provide the financial incentive, I guess, for the supply base to develop itself, right? But then coming back to your question, Sonia, about are our teams ready for this? It's a whole new competency, sustainability, right? And it's so broad. We all need to be working on it to some degree, whether we talk about environmental or social topics. So on one hand, we absolutely have to develop that competency across the board to a certain level with our whole organization if we're really serious about this and we really want to make it part of how we do business with our suppliers. And on the other hand, we need to have a specialized team that is really driving the processes and the tools and bringing the knowledge to the table and helping our category leaders and supplier leaders educate and drive those initiatives with our suppliers. So I think it's an investment that you've got to make, right, in order to make that happen. One good example is we have something in Schneider called the Zero Carbon Project, where we're targeting to cut the CO2 emissions of our top 1,000 suppliers by 2025. And what we've learned when we embarked on this program a couple of years ago is a vast majority, more than 70% of the suppliers have no clue where to begin in even measuring their carbon, right? So it was a massive education exercise that we had to go through. And we didn't know how to do it ourselves in procurement, right? But thankfully in Schneider, that's part of our business, right? We do decarbonization services and consulting as a business. So we leverage those resources, that knowledge, right? To build up a bank of knowledge and capability inside procurement. And still today we have events regularly. Just last week, we had one in Europe where we try to accelerate this program, and we leverage dozens of people from inside Schneider that have the expertise to help coach and train our suppliers on the actions they need to take. So, yeah, I think it's a massive effort that we need to undertake as a function, and this is where the where the SPP comes in and serves, I think, a really strong purpose in helping us educate ourselves and our teams on how to go about that with our suppliers.
Yeah, totally. This is exactly the spirit of SPP, indeed. Industry collaboration, and as you're pointing out, all of you, developing the skills in your procurement organization. You don't just invent yourself sustainable procurement. You need a set of skills. You need the knowledge, and those teams that can then support the other procurement teams. So, yeah, completely. I couldn't agree more. So there's a lot of questions in the Q&A box. I will come back to these afterwards and maybe carry on a bit with the flow of what we have now, unless I see something that is immediately relevant. I mean, they're all relevant, but just bouncing all over this thing. We've mentioned a few times that procurement sustainability is also obviously about suppliers. And actually, there's a couple of questions about this in the chat. We don't achieve sustainability without cooperating with our suppliers. So the word innovation is something that comes back a lot when you talk about sustainable procurement. Can you maybe elaborate on how driving for sustainable procurement practices has changed the way you manage the relationship with your suppliers and how you select and evaluate them? Maybe Malcolm, would you like to give a holistic introduction on that?
Let me start on this one, Sonia, because I think this is really quite an important and complex topic. There are different disparate perspectives to this, but I think the first one I would pick up is the point that Esther was making earlier on about risk and about risk management and about ensuring that you're putting in place the the right strategies to be able to manage that risk. And I do think that requires a very different approach and a very different set of skills and a different mindset, and particularly a very different mindset compared to when you're sourcing from an environment where you've kind of got abundant supply. This is quite a different world that we're now having to operate in. And therefore, yes, those skills around developing suppliers, I think are now critically important rather than just sort of running a tender process. But then to pick up on this point about messaging into the supply base and ensuring that you support the supply base, I think is also really, really important. Because what you don't want to have is a situation where suppliers are getting 5, 6, 10, 20 different messages from their customer base, and they're having to respond to each one of those individually, when actually what you want them to be doing as suppliers is to be thinking about sustainability, thinking about how do you make your supply chains more sustainable, thinking about how do you address climate change, how do you cut your emissions, how do you invest in the right technology to allow you to better supply your customers. And you want them to be doing that in a common way. So the importance, and Daniel talked about it, the importance of collaboration here should not be underestimated. And even we've seen very good collaboration even between competitors to ensure that the supply base is getting consistent messages from their customer base, such that they're investing in coming up with solutions which work for the customer base. And therefore they can put all of their efforts into increasing supply, rather than getting too worried about particular idiosyncrasies from one customer or another. And I do think that is quite a change in terms of how the profession now needs to operate and the skills that the profession now needs to have.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Malcolm, for this holistic view. Any comments, or one of you would like to pick up and elaborate further on this?
Yeah, if I may add to what Malcolm is saying, it is also, there is no such thing as a supplier base. It depends very much on where you are in the world. Maersk operates in most countries around the world, where you have very different starting points and very different availability of suppliers and what you can expect. However, you want to have a minimum level of what you want to deliver to your customers. So for us, it is the measuring part, and you can't really spread yourself thin. So you have to look, where do you make the biggest impact? And it doesn't mean if you focus on where you make the biggest impact that you exclude the rest. But like in our company, it's scope 1. That's the biggest bang for our buck. But it doesn't mean that we're not interested in the rest. But just to give some numbers, and I've written them down, our scope 1 emissions is 36 million tons per year. Anything where we invest and that will reduce significantly, that's where we make a biggest impact. So we focus on that and still work with our supplier base, and you need the supplier base to get the technology and the innovations covered. But I think it's more a mindset of the procurement teams, but also from the customers. How does it support what the customers are asking for?
Well, this leads me to a question that was asked in the chat, Esther, actually to you. Do you have an example of customer requirements in sustainability that you have to look after? And this was a question asked by Gianluca Falco from, I can't see the company.
Well, I can give an example. Many of our, or some, maybe not many customers ask, but we have quite a customer base, for instance, like H&M, that work with science-based reduction targets. And as we are shipping a lot of their goods around the world, we have to comply with that. So that's a concrete customer ask. In order to not just measure what you do, but also reduce your impact, you have to take measures. And in particularly customers that already have science-based targets, in order for them to meet those, you need to take action. And I think for the container industry, we move the vast majority of goods around the world. So I think the front runner customers, with the ones with the science-based targets, they will set what you, and that's my personal view, they will set what you need to deliver going forward. And together with those customers, you work on improving your outputs. Of course, and I think others can relate to that as well, is what is the willingness to pay from the customer to pay for the massive investments that are needed. I mean, we ordered vessels a few years ago. The first ones are coming into operation this year. They're not for free. The fuel, biofuel, doesn't have the same price point as fossil fuel. So what is the willingness to pay from customers? But the front runner customers are very explicit and very outspoken and hold us accountable. Good question, Gianluca.
Thank you for sharing this, Esther.
Yeah, maybe I can add I was happy to elaborate maybe on, first I feel lighter now that Esther has shared the scope 1 for Maersk. I feel a lot lighter now. But maybe one piece of experience here is at the beginning, I think most of the companies are looking at sustainability as a way to differentiate with their peers. I'm going to be more sustainable than my peers, so I'm going to win through that. But I think normally in that journey, we all quickly realize that it's not going to be possible. I think it's going to be very clear that sustainability is an important factor within a value chain that we all need to collaborate with. I think in this maturity space, I think we're all learning that we can't be looking at sustainability in isolation. Countries are not able to resolve sustainability issues by themselves, or certainly companies are needing to very tightly collaborate on defining rules, in defining how to advocate about sustainability. So it's part of the journey, and I think we're all learning how important it is to collaborate upstream and downstream on this theme, and not looking at it in isolation. So that has been probably my experience. I've been working for a packaging company right now, but before in a more commoditized company. This is probably learnings that companies which are higher on emissions have been actually experiencing probably before other companies that maybe are closer to consumers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next set of questions or areas I wanted to explore with you, and there's actually a couple of questions around that in the Q&A chat I see, are, what objectives have you set yourselves as CPO on sustainable procurement? So for yourself, for your teams, what are the KPIs that you are putting in place or would like to put in place, if you haven't been able yet, to monitor your teams on the sustainable procurement practices? And I think this is something that probably speaks a lot to the audience. They're looking for practical tools, practical information. Who would like to share?
I could say a couple words about that. I wrote an answer in the chat, but maybe to give it a little bit more color. In Schneider, we consider ourselves an impact company. So it means that we market ourselves towards our customers and towards investors as well, right? As one of the most sustainable companies in the world. So we have some aggressive targets as a group. We have it's a dozen long-term goals over a 5-year period from 2021 to 2025. We call it the Schneider Sustainability Impact. And because most of the impact with regards to sustainability is actually upstream with our suppliers, we have 4 out of those 12 targets really centered on our suppliers. And they're on carbon reduction, right? So 50% reduction in CO2 on the top 1,000 suppliers. We have targets around green materials, increasing the content of recycled and biomaterials in our products, as I mentioned before. Green packaging as well. So going to recycled packaging, getting rid of all single-use plastics, right? And then decent work, right? So, I mentioned most of the impact is upstream. That goes especially for labor. Most of the labor that goes into the products that we build and sell is at our suppliers. We need to make sure that they're providing a decent living wage, providing a diverse and inclusive work environment, et cetera, for their employees. So those, in a nutshell, are the big ones from our side in Schneider. I hope that serves to inspire some of you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Anybody else would like to share? Or we
started with the basics. So our code of conduct and the ethics are included in the vast majority of our contracts, which is a basic starting point. ESG is included and to be included with practical questions in all our go-to-market efforts. And also working on, and that's not just for the emission levels. The company has very ambitious targets, 2040 net zero. I just said scope 1 was 36 million tons. Scope 1, 2, and 3 combined is 66 million tons. So we still have a long way to go, but also the social aspect. So we have now labor condition guidelines, and that's the next step that is to be included around the world. What are the basic standards that we ask from our suppliers in delivering services for the company? But it's on a step-by-step approach. You can always include for the audience, even if your company doesn't have like a formal program, there are questions that you can ask your suppliers, and they come back with either innovation or they come back with things that you could pick up and build from further. I think it starts with asking and listening, but also staying true to yourself. Dare to walk away. If it's something, and this is very thin ice I'm walking on. If you're to come back on the first part where you said savings and coming on price, if something is very much in your price point, but it doesn't support your ambitions, you need to dare to walk away. Because else you will sort of stay around the same level. At least that's my experience. At the moment, you ask suppliers what they're doing, but also raise your expectations. You can open a dialogue, and then improvements can be made.
Great insights. Thank you.
And Sonia, there's some quite good questions there in the chat too about people asking about, is everybody starting from the same position? And is everybody equipped to be able to both measure and then drive for this improvement in terms of sustainability and supply chains? And I think, Esther's made a really good point there about these non-negotiable basics. And the non-negotiable basics kind of just need to be there, and maybe that's things about absence of modern-day slavery, or maybe that's things about the standards of integrity that you operate in your supply chain. But then you get into, I think, the much more difficult area, which we talk to a lot of people about, which is, well, how do you then measure and improve in areas like emissions, in areas like water usage, water consumption, and things like waste to landfill, particularly when you're looking through the entirety of the supply chain. And what we would see most commonly is people saying, well, what's really important is that I measure where I am now and then I improve. And that everybody has that focus on continuous improvement. Because people will start from different places. Supply chains are different. So the supply chain into financial services is not the same as the supply chain into construction, which is not the same as the supply chain into a consumer goods company. So people start from different places. And what's really important is that we have this absolute focus on continuous improvement. And that's where I think organizations and arrangements like the Sustainable Procurement Pledge can really help. because they can come out with examples of how organizations are continuously improving and are continuing to make their supply chains over time more and more sustainable.
I would like to add something, Malcolm. There is also the risk, or it is a bit of a catch-22. If you don't know what your starting point is, you can spend a lot of time on finding what your exact starting point is today, and then you are hit by not taking action. Or you take actions and then you get hit by not knowing for sure what your baseline was. So I think it's important that steps are taken.
It is, but you have to, Esther, you have to take action. You have to take action. I mean, the time is now for taking action.
Exactly.
You cannot spend all of your time working out exactly where your starting point is, but you need to know roughly where it is such that you can move forward.
Which is an answer to one of the questions in the chat. Somebody is asking, or I've lost the message itself, but somebody is asking, how do you make sure that your procurement teams have the right data to work with? And yeah, it goes back to that. I mean, you don't necessarily need to have exactly the right data. You need to have an idea of your baseline so that you can move your needle. And maybe, you think you're at 100 and actually you're at 50. But the point is you're going to go from 50 to 70, right? And from 100 to 70 and from 50 to 20. This is, I think, in essence, the message that you're all saying.
Yeah, and maybe to add one small anecdote to that one too. The point is to have an impact, right?
Exactly.
To maximize the impact. One of the debates that we had when we were setting our carbon target internally was, there's I think a easy to understand push to have carbon data at the product level. So how much carbon does it take to make product X, for example, right? Which is some of our products that are extremely complex. It's like boiling the ocean just to figure that out, just to figure out what the starting point is, right? So we could spend hours and days and weeks and months and years just figuring out what is the carbon content, or we could instead spend that energy on working with suppliers to reduce their carbon output. So where we landed with our target was not to reduce the carbon of specific products, but rather the full scope 1 and 2 of our suppliers to reduce by 50%, a much bigger impact. And by the way, much easier to measure, right? And focus more on getting results, the end result that we really need to have, rather than optimizing a KPI, which our customers may or may not care about.
Yeah, and I think this is a very good point, because a lot of companies and people get very impressed and don't dare to start because they say, oh, I don't know how I'm going to start. I don't know how to calculate this. And yes, it's not about being accurate, it's about making the impact. So thank you for sharing this, Daniel. Talking about carbon reduction, there's a question here from Jo Parking. She's actually a co-chair of the UK SPP chapter. She's asking, she has a question with regards to carbon reduction programs. Are you aware of any great examples where the notion of internal carbon pricing mechanism has been adopted with great success? I'm looking for case studies of companies leading the way.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understand it.
Joe is asking about examples where the notion of internal carbon pricing mechanism has been adopted with great success. So it's basically applying sort of an internal carbon tax to drive your decisions. So it's not offsetting, it's saying, well, if I do this, it's going to drive that much of carbon, whereas if I do this. If I understand the question correctly as well.
I'm happy to take that one, as we have a very sizable decarb organization. We're not interested internally in offsetting. We're interested in reducing. That doesn't mean that we don't take any offsetting actions, but that what we're working towards is true reduction. And if you're very fuel heavy, like we are, it is actually very easy to get the impact governed, because your emission reduction is equal to your fuel reduction. So if you're very fuel 1 ton less of fuel equals a certain amount of less emissions. So we calculate that, but we're interested in real reductions, not just offsetting.
I can add, I think I don't have a great example of a program, but I know that many companies are using an internal cost of carbon as a measurement and as an evaluation tool when running RFQs. The other interesting exercise that we normally do is having a Pareto of the cost of carbon for all the materials we buy. You quickly realize that in different industries, you will have a very different cost of carbon associated to, let's say, greener product, greener plastic versus brown plastic, greener metal versus brown metal, if you can call it. So if you Pareto them, you quickly realize how companies that are buying multi-material like we do can achieve their target starting from the lower cost ones, and there will be others probably that will be the last one to be sort of purchased at the premium that the cost of production require. And normally you realize also that none of these compares to the equivalent value of paper allowances, as Esther said, that probably not interesting at this stage.
Thank you. We have so many questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to go through them. Here's one from Arpan Chola, working for ICL in Amsterdam. Hello, from Amsterdam. I am in Amsterdam as well. In your companies, are you evaluating suppliers' responses to RFPs with sustainability, reducing carbon emission percentage as one of key evaluation parameters? If no information provided, they need to rate it in overall evaluation for contract award. All right, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I completely understand the question either. Maybe sorry, Arpan, I'm trying to juggle so many questions at a time. We talked about somebody, Fanny Ganti is asking from Public Procurement, is asking about the sustainable incentive and performance. Have you developed or implemented sustainable incentives, performances, clauses with your partner suppliers? Any feedback to help them engage in your sustainable overall strategy? Any thoughts about it? Thank you. So I think this is about how do you implement in your, are you managing to implement in your contract specific KPIs around sustainability, which go, I think, beyond, Esther, you mentioned earlier, having the code of conduct and some ESG topics in the contracts. And I think Fanny Ganti is probably asking here about the next step, where you actually measure your suppliers.
But Sonia, I think, if I can, I think it's back to that same question which we've all been talking about, is you kind of got to sort of these non-negotiable basics, which are really important that you put into your tender process. And if your suppliers don't meet those, then as Esther so rightly says, then you shouldn't be seduced by going with that supplier when they don't meet your non-negotiable basics. And then it's about continuous improvement. It's about continuous improvement. It is about reducing emissions. It's not about offsetting. It is about reducing.
Yeah, maybe to build on that a bit as well. I agree with you, Malcolm. There's a certain basic requirement that every supplier has to meet, right? That has been there even before sustainability was such a hot topic, right? But then clearly there's a club of suppliers that need to outperform, right? We have tens of thousands of suppliers in Schneider, right? But there's about 1,500 or so that really matter, right? So those are the suppliers where we're actively concentrating more of our business, right? Those are the strategic suppliers. And to be considered strategic, you have to be compliant on all the more advanced sustainability programs, right? You have to be actively reducing your carbon, working on green materials, doing all of those things that I was mentioning earlier. Those suppliers get preferences. Those suppliers get the growth, right? That's at the end of the day what all those companies want. They want to grow. And if you make a prerequisite to growth, active improvement on sustainability, then you're going to have a big impact. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel. So there's a question here from Reda Jury. The question debated with CEO, so I assume with his CEO. From experience of forecast, what rough costs markup is estimated tolerated to procure clean, sustainable services and goods? That's what basically he wants a number. How much? What's the accepted percentage of more expensive? There's one thing we didn't talk about, which is the TCO approach, to shift that conversation from purely cost savings, hard P&L cost saving, to having a TCO approach, which then I think kind of makes this question, how much of a markup are we ready to accept, irrelevant. Anybody wants to
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one first. The question assumes that there is always a higher cost. Whereas and looking for a number, the answer is it depends. It depends on where you are in the world, what it is that you're procuring. But for instance, electric vehicles, and I think people who own an electric car can relate to that. It's the capex that is requires money, but your opex is actually lower than what your traditional car is, because your maintenance and your fuel is from a different price point. So the mantra, it is always more expensive, is not true. And the second point I would like to make, if you want to be competitive going forward in a world that is rapidly changing, and yes, the willingness to pay is a topic. It is also your requirements are changing. So I think the fact that that people say it is more expensive, it's also the brand risk. Do you go with cheap? Cheap is something different than low cost. What if it's a supplier that doesn't treat their workers ethically, and it comes out? Is that what you want to be associated with as a brand? So I think the total cost is very hard to put in, because the risk associated with being associated with less reputable suppliers is also something you need to factor in. So I don't think you can say it's 10% or 20% or $1,000 or ₹1,000,000 or 50 euros. I think there is much more to it, but the risk is very, very different. And CapEx and OpEx are different things.
You're absolutely right, Esther. And that's where it's back again to those non-negotiable basics. You have to have those non-negotiable basics in place. And they are what they say they are. They're non-negotiable. And those do impact on things like protecting your reputation. I mean, if you're a branded organization, then the value of your reputation is huge, 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 huge. And that should never, ever be underestimated and destroyed at your peril.
I see we are coming to close to the end of our session. I think we could carry on talking for hours. Francesco, did you just want to add something, or did I? No, sorry. No. There's a lot of unanswered questions in the chat. I am sorry. We will be taking all those questions. You can join the SPP team afterwards. Maybe we can answer some of these questions. Otherwise, we will try to we will download them and try to address them. Before we close that session, two things. I would like to have one final word of wisdom from each of you. What do you really want the audience to go away with, thinking, this is what Francesco, this is what Esther, this is what Malcolm and Daniel told me, and I won't forget. And second thing, we will be running a poll for the audience. If you could please let us know what you thought of this session, it would be fantastic. So let's start by the final words of wisdom. I'm going to look at my screen, go from left to right. Francesco, you're the first one.
Sure. Maybe just a word of wisdom, quick one, is sustainability. It is a critical skill for a procurement professional. We have a very important role in each company to drive it. And I'm sure that I would like that your takeaway is this is something that we drive and not something that somebody else in the company drives. And we have a very important role to play here.
Thank you. Very nice. Esther?
Apart from all the big things and the obvious things, and there was a question from Gary on, I'll address that one through LinkedIn separately. But there's no need to wait, until you have a clear direction or you have a program in place. I want to mention something in Maersk that was started by the IT procurement team. They built something, it's called a Technology Sustainability Index, and it's for hardware, software, cloud providers in the IT. And every company asks the same questions to the same suppliers, which ask, there is a lot of effort in asking, there's a lot of money involved. They've developed a tool, and you can find it in a LinkedIn group, Technology Sustainability Index, TSI it is called, where it's called Powered by Maersk, but it's available for everybody. So I think a lot of the things that you can do already yourself as a procurement professional, you can do that today. And you can develop things if you can't find what is there. I think it's more the mindset and the need to take action now, and not just wait until there's a full program or there's full guidelines or measurements in place. You can do stuff today.
Do it now. Thank you, Esther. Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm not going to give you one, I'm going to give you three, Sonia. So there's a bit of a repeat here, and I think that this story and this repeat is pretty important. So one, make sure you invest in your people, make sure you've got the people with the right skills, and it is about risk management, risk mitigation, and not just the basic supply chain and procurement skills, which you need anyway, but it is making sure you've got people with the right skills. Secondly, this has to be about collaboration. You can't do this on your own. Climate change is far, far too big an issue for any one organization to address on their own. So this has to be about collaboration. And then the third one is start now, get on with it. Do it now, don't wait. And it's about starting, it's about continuously improving. It's not about worrying about measuring exactly where you are. It is about improving and now.
Yes, thanks, Malcolm. Absolutely. Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Look, it's all been said, so I'll be very brief. But if you work in procurement, you're a very powerful person, right? And you have a lot of responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So in a typical industrial company like Schneider, for example, we have 34 billion euros in revenue and about 16 billion in spend that we're managing, right? A lot of responsibility. And when it comes to sustainability, we have the potential to make a massive impact. So it's absolutely critical that we take the lead, that we lean into this as procurement leaders, because if not us, who, right? And then the other point that I'll make is that we're not alone. We have the things like Sustainable Procurement Pledge and many, many, many other resources where we can learn from each other, align, and all drive in the same direction. I think that's also very critical for success in sustainability with your suppliers.
Thank you so much. Fantastic messages to end this session. I think we have to close so that the next session can start. It was amazing. Thank you so much for your engagement, for your involvement, for your contribution from the panelists, of course, and also from the audience. And apologies if we couldn't answer all your questions. We will download them and we'll try to get back to them. There's a poll running on the screen. Last chance to quickly tell us if you were happy or not with the session. And please enjoy still the rest of the day. There's still many more sessions to come on SPP, on the WSPD 2023. Thank you very much, and have a great day.